Good morning. We will be reading chapter 2 today. We're going to wait for a few more people to join us, but we'll be reading chapter 2. Hope everyone's doing well today. I found a blonde wig, so I figured I'd wear a blonde wig for today's reading. Everyone having a good week so far? I had a few requests to post these book readings or story readings on YouTube, so we are actually working on uploading chapter 1, and then we'll do the consecutive chapters to follow. Hi there, Esther Shop. I figure we'll give a couple more seconds, and then we're just going to start into it. The great thing about this is that we can just start reading, and then we can catch people up as we go. If you're new to this, we have decided that besides doing our Curious Joke hotline, which you can actually call us daily and we will tell you a new joke, they're usually a dad joke, but we decided that you could tune in and we would be reading a different book. And we're going to start with Dolly Parton, My Life and Other Unfinished Business. It was written in the mid-90s and published in the mid-90s. Okay. Oh, Bryce and Willow are downstairs in the yard. You can't really see them, but they're down there. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and just start reading, and we'll just see who joins us. I'll try my best to pay attention to comments, to if I'm speaking too fast, but we're just going to go right into it. Okay, so if you missed chapter 1, or would like a recap, chapter 1 was all about her tiny, very early beginnings, like when she was born, how her dad was a sharecropper, the woman that owned the land that they sharecropped on, her name was Aunt Martha. She ended up passing away at the end of the book. We learned about, I think it was called smash boxes, little dust hills that they would smash, which were part of mushroom spores when they would dry out and spread the mushrooms. And then at the very end of the book, we got into a very, very weird topic. It was about spanking. So we ended the book with spanking. Who knows where we'll go today? We could go with something completely better. Okay, so again, we are reading Dolly Parton, My Life and Other Unfinished Business. We're going to go to chapter 2. The good thing about this is that we don't have to sit here and read the prologue. We don't have to read the book jacket. The book jacket was really boring, if you recall. Okay, chapter 2. I don't know if you can see that, but it says chapter 2. Might be backwards for you as well. Okay. Animals always were a big part of our lives. It seems like a pointless thing. Oh, thanks, Chelsea, for the wig. I found a blonde one. I knew we have a bunch of wigs somewhere, but I didn't know where it was, but I found it. Okay. It seems like a pointless thing for kids to get attached to something like a chicken that is going to eventually end up on the dinner table. But we did it anyways. Oh, we have a visitor really quick. Someone who would like to introduce himself.
Hello, all.
Willow. And Bryce.
Hello, all, and welcome.
And Bryce had to dress up for this.
I can't be topped every time.
Willow had to wear her Christmas pajamas. We're all trying to do our part to entertain you all.
Say hi, everybody. Look right there and smile. Say hi, everybody.
Okay, we're going to keep reading it, little lady. You want to sit and read?
I'll grab her.
Okay. We had one favorite chicken, which we named Penny. Human beings all have distinct personalities, and I believe that animals do too. It's harder for us to distinguish them because of the most part of their personality traits are subtle. At least they usually are. Not so with Penny. This scraggly-looking red hen could only be described as goofy. If she had been a human being, she definitely would have been institutionalized. If anybody ever dropped anything, she would have snatched it up and taken off running. She would run... Oh, Willow's gonna go. She'll be back, don't worry. She'll be back there. Oh, we have a hello from St. George? Oh, that's my mom.
Hi, Judy.
I can't swear now. Unless it's coming in the book. Okay. If anybody definitely would have been institutionalized. If anybody ever dropped anything, she would snatch it up and take it off running. She would run with it all day long, and nobody could stop her. I remember one day when Rachel was a baby. She was sitting in the yard. Remember, Dolly Parton had a lot of siblings. I think it was like 7 or 8. We'll go back and preface that. I'll do more looking into that. I can't remember that part. It's the details. I can't do details. Was sitting in the yard with her bottle. So Rachel was sitting in the yard with her bottle. And somehow the nipple came off, the bottle nipple. Keep it clean. And fell to the ground. Penny one-hopped it like some kind of feathery shortstop and took off running like a chicken with a nipple in her mouth. Because she was a chicken with a nipple in her mouth. Rachel started in squalling like a banshee. Mama said, "Lord, we got to get that nipple back. If we only got one. It's the only one we've got." Well, we all took off after that crazy chicken. We chased her around the barn, over hill and holler. But she always stayed a few steps ahead of us. The boys started throwing rocks at her, and we tried various ways of heading her off. But she seemed to be enjoying it. I can't remember how the nipple was ever rescued because I fell on a piece of glass and cut my knee almost to the bone. I still have the scar from chasing that stupid chicken. If you're joining us, we are reading Dolly Parton, My Life and Any Other and My Life and Other Unfinished Business. I don't remember it myself, but my family swears there was a time when I was caught sucking a sow. Yep, we read that correctly. She was sucking a sow. I was about 3 years old, and we had a sow who had fewer pigs than she had nipples. We went from spanking in the last chapter to this. Wow. Well, she was lying under a snowball bush with her litter, and there was an empty place at dinner, so I fell in with pigs and got myself a nice plump teat. we are here. Okay. Well, God, well that's she's sucking on a pig's nipple. Well, she was lying under a snowball bush. Okay, we said that. And there was an empty place at dinner. So I fell in with the pigs and got myself a nice plump teat. I was soon discovered and quickly removed from the sow with considerable embarrassment, more to my mama than to me. I don't know that there's anything to it, but some have suggested that there could be connection between that incident and the way I developed later in life. If a sow's objective is to fatten up her offspring, then she would have been mighty proud of the way her temporary one turned out. There was a time when I definitely became a hog. I'm sure that my sucking on the sow's a pig, or the mama pig, I guess is the real word for on the farm. I'm sure that sucking on my sow was prompted more. Hold on, we have a Willow emergency. We're playing with the organic plant fertilizer. I have to get her. Not so. Okay, we're back. Don't worry, we got it away from her. I'm sure that sucking on my sow prompted more out of wanting something to do than by any particular craving for hog's milk. We were always trying to find something to do. One thing I enjoyed a lot with my sisters was playing house with moss. There was a kind of thick, green, luxurious moss that grew in the shady place up in the hills. We would take it and cover stumps and pretend they were upholstered chairs and sofas. We would also cover the ground with moss for carpet. That beautiful. I have never ceased to be amazed by nature. Anybody who spends any time at all observing nature has to believe there is a God. My mother had a way of making little games out of things that might be unpleasant or even frightening to us kids. I will never forget one day at the house on Locust Ridge. Daddy had gone away for a few days on some kind of trip, and Mama was left way back in those woods with all of those kids to tend to. This particular day, the sky began to turn yellow, and it looked stormy. I know Mama was worried, but she wouldn't let us know it. I'm seeing we're getting quite a bunch of joiners all of a sudden, so I'll catch you up. We're reading Chapter 2 of Dolly, My Life and Any Other... Well, I don't know why I keep calling it Any Other. Dolly, My Life and Other Unfinished Business. There's Willow and Bryce in the back. Okay, we're going back.
How many followers you got there, Dad?
We ain't worried about that. We're just here to
Hi, Andy.
We're just here to entertain people. Hi.
Fion and Jude.
Okay, here we go. I lost my spot. She gathered us all in the house and said that we'd play a new game. She had us take take the couch and some other furniture and turn it upside down and put it up. God, the cat just bit me. Oh my God, everyone's trying to keep involved in this reading today. The boys especially liked this part of the game because they got to do something they would have gotten their butts beat for under normal circumstances. Then Mama said, "Let's all pretend that there's a big storm coming, and let's crawl up under the couch to take cover." Of course, this wasn't pretend at all, but she made us feel like it was, and that kept us from getting too scared. After a while, it got a lot easier to pretend there was a storm. The wind blew like mad. Ooh. And we could hear tree limbs snapping and things blowing by the house. Our house was between two mountains, so tornadoes hardly ever came through our little valley. But this one had managed to touch down in our little holler like some kind of angry giant sticking out. A black, dark tongue. Mama knew it was bad, she said. "Now let's all pray that the storm will pass over us and leave us unharmed." And pray we did. Those of us old enough to know what was really going on prayed like we'd never prayed in our lives. The noise was horrifying. Woo! I should probably get some sound machines for this. Those of us old enough to know what was really going on prayed like we'd never prayed in our lives. The noise was horrifying. It sounded like a... Too loud. Too loud. Too loud. Too loud. It sounded like a... After a while, the noise stopped and the wind stopped, and we went outside to see what had happened. The storm had done a lot of damage. It had uprooted trees and torn up crops and blown down fences, but our little house had been completely skipped over. If praying really did help, I always thought it must have been Mama's prayers that were actually answered. Hers certainly deserved to be. Yet Chelsea said, "Too much tornado." Bryce really tries to produce these things. He just gotta stop. We're just wanting to read a book about Dolly Parton and her other unfinished business. Before the 90s. Where were we? As glad as we were to be alive, Bryce, too much interaction.
They wanted it, I thought.
No, too much interaction. As glad as we were to be alive, we were sad to find that all our little chickens had been killed. All of our chickens and ducks and things. All of us kids were heartbroken. Sometimes it makes me feel a little better just during doing something. So we made a little graveyard and buried them all. If the truth were known, that's probably the reason behind human funerals too. We had our little animal funeral, and Denver preached. Denver always wanted to do the preaching. Denver is the sibling. Denver always wanted to do the preaching, and I'm sure Mama would have loved it if he had actually become a preacher. But I'm afraid it was just like me sucking this out. He was just looking for something to do. You need your little tiny hand and a little hand on that hand. I'll pick some up next time I go to the store to fulfill online orders. That's a good idea. Little finger hands. I had to interact. Hold on. I have to correct Bryce because he is getting way too involved and distracting from this reading.
Does anyone see a similarity?
Bryce, we don't want to have a marital dispute in the middle of this video, do we? No.
Could be good for ratings.
Could be good for ratings. Well, we'll watch that on Bravo later. We're getting back to reading. Okay. Partly because it was something to do, and part out of a sense of adventure, we once undertook to dig to China. I admit to being the instigator. I was always reading. I loved books, and I would read anything I could get my hands on. I had read something about China, and it seemed like the most different and fascinating place I could ever imagine. Of course, even then I had dreams of leaving the Smokies and traveling the world. So any place that wasn't Locust Ridge was exotic to me. I was going around talking about China, and somebody told me that if you dug far enough, you could come out to China. Well, that was all I needed to hear. I convinced the other kids to help me, and we started digging. We picked a spot up on the mountain. I can't imagine why. You'd think we were going to dig all the way to China. We would have to at least given ourselves the advantage of starting on the lowest holler we could find. Kids gullible enough to try to dig to China in the first place are not likely to think of that. Besides, being up on the mountain made it kind of secret and special. I think I remember trying to dig to China as a kid. I guess I do have something in common with Dolly Parton. We started a hole and we dug at it for months. Anytime we could get away, we dug with tiny cans and knives and forks and just about anything that would move a little bit of dirt. Of course, every day I was just convinced we were going to break through to China any minute. One of my brothers insisted that if we did make it to China, we would all be standing on our heads, but the rest of us poo-pooed that notion. We did, however, have considerable discussion about what the Chinamans would be like. What would they think of us? Would they kill us? Of course, I was willing to risk being killed to see China. I thought surely, if we could dig all the way there, we could deal with a few billion Chinese. Needless to say, we did not quite reach China. The hole we dug seems like quite an accomplishment in itself, though. We thought it was huge. I went back there as an adult, and the hole was not nearly as impressive as I had remembered it. In fact, someone had put a little gate across the opening, and it was using it for a doghouse. Maybe if we had started it in the holler, who knows? Even now, looking back on it, I think digging to China, or at least the attempt, was important for us. The excitement we felt anticipating our destination was real, even if the plan was flawed. At least we made the effort. No bunch of kids ever had more fun digging a doghouse. It doesn't surprise me that someone had the good sense to make our China hole into a doghouse. After all, it was there. In those mountains, even today, if something is there, you find a way to use it. I believe that philosophy. I know, Chelsea, I know it's not very politically correct, but remember, this was written in the 90s. Dolly, My Life, and other unfinished business. We can't criticize her too much. Okay. It doesn't surprise me that someone had the good sense to make our China into a doghouse. After all, it was there. In these mountains, even today, if something is there, you find a way to use it. I believe that philosophy has made me what I am today. It is not just about survival, but about trying every day, literally every minute, to make things a little bit better. The whole family might work for days to clear trees or move rocks or whatever it took to scratch out enough farmable land to plant one extra row of corn. But from that day on, the Partons would be one row of corn richer. Yes, I said richer, for riches are in the mind and the spirit of the one eating the corn. When you think about it, gold has no real value at all. It's too soft to make tools out of it, and you can't scrape enough of it together to make a good chicken pot, or a good cooking pot. On a scale of real worth, it can't possibly compare to the gold in a good fat ear of corn that pops when you bite it, or even the gold in the homemade butter you roll the corn in. That is especially true when the dirt and calluses on the hands holding the corn were earned honestly by helping to grow it. We are learning some things. When I think about survival and the things Mama and Daddy did to keep us all alive and reasonably healthy, I'm aware that it was not just their wills and wits that kept us going. It was a legacy passed down from every mountain dweller who had ever learned anything about surviving hundreds of years before, starting with the Native Americans. Other than the land itself, this was the most important thing people had to leave their children, and my parents had learned it well. There was one day when this passed along treasure became very important to me. Although I did not realize it at the time, every spring around May 1st, Mama would let us shed the shoes that had held our feet prisoner all winter and run all over the hills barefoot. The wood barefoot still conjures up a sense of freedom as I remember the feel of new grass between my toes. We would start out with a new white tinder. The wood barefoot still conjures up a sense of freedom as I remember the feel of new grass between my toes. We would start out with the new white tender feet that had been steamed soft by drying snow-damp socks by the fire. By summer's end, we would tramp back into the house with older, wiser feet, brown and tough like shoes with nails on them. Feet that had slapped their way across the Flat Creek stones and dug makeshift ladders of clay banks. Feet that scoffed at field stubble and laughed at cockleburns. But on the day we declared our independence from shoes, Mama would make us go all around the house and yard with a tub and collect all of the broken bottles, can lids, and other hazards that had gone unnoticed under the snow, trodden down by our indestructible brogans, and now posing threat to our new spare spring feet. We had gathered almost a full tub of debris when I noticed some broken glass on the other side of the fence. I climbed the fence, and as I jumped down on the other side, my foot came down on a piece of metal that had been part of a plowshare that was partially buried in the dirt. My foot was severely cut. Can you imagine that? My toes were dangling, barely hanging on. I thought I would be crippled for life. I might well have been if Mama hadn't known exactly what to do. God, it's getting good. In the hills at times like that, especially when a child is threatened, everyone stops what they're doing and jumps on the effort until everything possible is done to help. This took a great effort by several people. I remember a group of men holding me. I know one was Daddy and some were my brothers, but I know that some men were from among the neighbors were there too. Why did it take so many strong men to hold a little girl? Because of what Mama had to do. Remember, her mama. First, she put kerosene on the cuts to fight infection and packed it with cornmeal to stop the bleeding. Then she took the same needle and thread she used for making quilts and sewed my little tiny foot back together without benefit of anesthetic. Ugh. I screamed and cried and fought mightily, and the men held me still. Mama's hands, the kerosene, and the cornmeal all did their work. I have complete use of my foot today because Mama knew what to do. I have often wondered who first learned those things over how many generations. What mountain man or woman long since dead do I owe for my toes? It occurred to me that in the future, it would make more sense if we collected the trash before we took off our shoes. I suppose that was my contribution to the legacy. It's a great one too, you know. Okay, I'm going to turn to this side. Time to get this side. I wish I could claim to have added to the legacy with regarding the farming, but the truth is, I hated to work in the fields. I don't know if it was out of dread or physical work itself, or because the work took me away from my songwriting and dreaming, but I would do anything to try to get out of it. I would sometimes pretend to be sick, but my mama would just feel my forehead and look down my throat and send me lying butt in the fields. Sometimes, if I insisted, she would threaten me with castor oil, but I would rather have put up with a few moments of absolute hell than suffer all day long. So I would agree to take it. Well, that was all Mama needed to hear. If I was willing to take my castor oil, I had to be lying about being sick. If I was really sick, I would fight that spoon as if it were the devil himself. Hold on, I need a drink of water. Taking a drink. Okay. Again, we're reading Dolly, My Life, and Other Unfinished Business. Published in the 90s by Dolly Parton. Written by Dolly Parton. I knew that my older sister, Willa Dean, had a problem with nosebleeds. If she got too hot, her nose would bleed, so she got to stay out at the house. She did a lot of the housework and took care of the younger kids. She was like a second mother to us all. I figured what worked for Willa Dean, or what worked for Dean, could work for me. So I used to try to give myself a nosebleed. A nosebleed would be perfect. It would be graphic and horrifying. All that red blood streaming down my face. It was sure to bring out the poor child reaction and get me a one-way ticket back to the house. Once I got back to the house, I could write songs or sing about songs, and most of all, get on with my ill-important dreaming. I would go behind a tree where Daddy couldn't see what I was doing, and I would hit myself in the nose as hard as I could. Could you imagine Dolly Parton as a kid hitting herself in the nose? That's pretty funny. I remember jumping out of a tree and trying to break my arm because I wanted to cast the sign, but it didn't work. Sometimes I came close. I got to where I could smell blood, but I never managed a work-stopping nosebleed. In the midst of the direst poverty and despair in the human spirit, especially that of children, will find some hope to cling to, some promise of a better day. That had to be what our Uncle Dot Watson, who was married to my mother, Sister Estelle, was playing on when he put us up to growing a pony. We had all kinds of animals on the farm, but we never had a pony. A pony, after all, would eat, feed, and have to be taken care of and not really contribute anything to the survivability of the family, except providing the kids with a little fun. We used to dream about having a pony and how wonderful he and the freedom he would give us to hop on his back any time we felt like and traipse across the hill and hollers like wild Indians. Uncle Dot was living proof that the spirit of mischief that naturally crops up in a kid does not necessarily end with adulthood. He knew we wanted a pony, so he told us that we could grow one. How, Uncle Dot? How? Why? By planting pony seeds, of course. Sorry, someone just tried calling and I had to ignore it. Okay. A pony seed to anybody else would have been a horse turd. But to a kid who is ready to believe anything with such great promise, it sounds like a pimple. Not a pimple. In a simple and workable concept. We set out to find the very best pony seeds. We studied turds for hours, talking about how well shaped that one was or what a good, strong pony this one would be because it had a lot of hay fibers in it. We planted our horse turds and weeded them and watered them religiously. I guess we honestly expected one day to walk out and find a row of fine, healthy ponies. When nothing happened, we would wonder if we had watered them too much or planted them too close to a tree. And all the while, Uncle Dot would listen to our questions and give us advice. He always said we should be ready with a rope because the ponies come up really fast once they get started. That is the funniest thing. Of course, we never grew a pony, but we had a fine herd of turds. A fine herd of turds. You heard it, Dolly Parton talking about a fine herd of turds growing ponies with horse turds. For those of us just joining, we are reading Dolly, My Life, and Other Unfinished Business, published in the 90s by Dolly herself. We're only in chapter 2 and we're learning about horse turds on her family farm in the Smoky Mountains. The experience didn't really hurt any of us, and I guess the adults had a lot of fun at our expense. We had some too, and that was, after all, the idea behind having a pony in the first place, was to have some fun. The whole pony seed experience reminds me of the story about the little boy who was such an optimist that it got on his brother's nerves. The brother decided to break him of it, so one Christmas he hid the little boy's real present and put a sack of horse manure under the tree instead. On Christmas morning, the brother was surprised to find the little optimistic digging excitedly through a sack, saying gleefully, "With all this horse shit, there's got to be a pony here somewhere." That's really funny. I guess we were all optimists, and I didn't know it. In those hills, there are worse things to be. I can remember always having a desperate need to bring something fine or beautiful, or at least different, into my life. At school, there were these colored chalks and crayons. The teacher would write with the chalk on the chalkboard, and I used to think to myself, I could draw on the barn with those and make something really pretty. I also thought, if I could just get those crayons home, where nobody could see me and I wasn't embarrassed, I could paint something real nice. That's why I took a box of crayons and 2 pieces of chalk one day, while everybody had gone out for recess. I hid them inside my shirt when nobody was looking. I put them in a hollow tree trunk near the schoolyard, planning to come back for them after school was out. A little girl had seen me hide them, and she told on me. I had always been afraid of the teacher. I was born in January, so I started school when I was 5. The teacher was a big man, and he used to whip. Oh God, are we going to talk about whipping again? We ended last chapter with whipping. We do have a few pages, so maybe we're not. The teacher was a big man, and he used to whip the boys with a razor stroke. He would stand at the front of the class and wave that big leather stroke around and say, You be good to me, and I'll be good to you. I guess he was intentionally trying to scare us. It worked. The man looked like a giant from where I was sitting. I could hear the razor stroke slicing through the air, just over our head. That was my first experience with school, and it scared me to death. After school that day, I went to the old hollow tree to get the crayons and found the teacher glaring at me, razor stroop in one hand, and my pitiful stolen colors in the other. I closed my eyes and waited for the thick of the piece of the leather to come down on me, but it didn't. I would have preferred being beaten to what happened next. The teacher called all of the other kids together, and they watched as he took hold of my shoulders, shook me. "Do you all see what Dolly has done? She has stolen," he railed. I was terrified and embarrassed. The teacher made such a big thing out of it. I felt completely worthless and vile. I got in trouble again when I got home. We had always been taught not to steal. That was one bit of Bible teaching Daddy agreed with Mama on. And I was harshly punished for what I had done. That whole experience gave me a negative feeling towards school that I never really got over. I can remember some worthwhile experience associated with school, though. Here we are, reading about Dolly Parton in school. Learning something new today. When I got to the stage where I was growing out of my tomboy years and starting to take an interest in boys, that's Willow, I had a young, good-looking teacher named Bud Messer. No, that's Willow you hear. But there is a rooster in the background. That's funny. That was Willow the baby. But there also is a rooster. So it could have been either. Oh, here comes Willow. When I got to the stage where I was growing out of my tomboy years and starting to take an interest in the boys, I had a young, good-looking teacher named Bud Messer. I know we read that, but that's how to catch us back up. He was the kind that young girls would always have a crush on. Yep, those are roosters. That's the rooster you hear, because we're back on Kauai right now. We made it back to Kauai before all of this started happening. So we're here, not in Hermosa Beach right now. He was the kind that young girls would always have a crush on. I was taken with him because he seemed to be such a fine gentleman, which, aside from Dr. Thomas, was a pretty rare thing in those parts. He tried to teach us manners and social skills. I remember once going to a pie supper. That was where each girl baked a pie. My mother baked mine and brought it to a social, where it would be auctioned off to the boy who bid the most of it. The boy who brought your pie had the right to sit with you while the two of you shared it. It was a sweet old country custom, and I guess it was a way of getting around shyness. It was a lot easier for a boy to act like he really wanted a certain pie than it was for him to admit he was interested in the girl who came with it. This was at the time when I had first met my dear friend Judy Ogle, and we went to this pie supper together. My pie was bought by Dewey King. I don't remember how much he paid for it, but I do remember he had to bid against a couple other boys for it. This was the first indication I can remember that boys were interested in me, and I was touched by it. Although I'm not quite sure where. I don't want to know where she was touched by it. Dewey seemed determined to have my pie at any price, and I was impressed by that as well. He had a twin sister, and they both had snow-white hair. He was the prettiest thing you'd ever want to see. Well, Dewey and I sat down to eat our pie. I guess I was chewing with my mouth open, so Bud Messer came over and sat with us and tried very discreetly to tell me to close my mouth when I ate. "It's nice for the young ladies to chew with their mouths closed," he said. I was a little embarrassed, but I was also proud that I had learned something. I felt so grown up that I could sit there and eat like a lady. Dolly Parton, eating like a lady. I was anxious to get home so that I could tell the other kids, even the ones older than I. I felt like it was my duty to help bring them the finer things in life. None of us Partons had ever had any table manners. We would sit at the table and smack our food like a bunch of possums in the mulberry bush. Well, when my chance came, I got a little confused. Paused for poor connection. Now we're back. Well, my chance came. I got a little confused. I had learned that I was supposed to talk with food. I had learned that I was not supposed to talk with food in my mouth, and that I was supposed to chew with my mouth closed. When I became the teacher rather than the student, it came out as, "You're never supposed to chew with food in your mouth." Needless to say, my manners lesson didn't much have an impact on my family of smacking possums. other than to bring on a healthy round of laughter. I remember my mother making an attempt to civilize my father. He had been drinking and had come home stewed to the gills and was peeing off the porch. Mama, naturally mad at him, and seized this opportunity to chastise him. "Lee, I don't want you peeing off the porch," she scolded. "You're setting a bad example for the children." It was not within the bounds of the man-woman relationship of that time and place for her to criticize the drinking that had caused him to pee off the porch. So she had to confine her complaint to the act itself. The fact that she had brought the children into it was just to justify her lack of tolerance and to play off of the regard she knew my daddy had for doing right by his children. I don't know how much of that my daddy thought about before he answered, "Fine, Ava Lee, I won't pee off the porch," and he calmly got down off the porch and began to pee onto it. Well, that, my friends, was chapter 2 for today's Curious Story Time. Again, we just read chapter 2 of Dolly, My Life and Other Unfinished Business, released in the mid-90s. We are going to be doing these readings every other day, 10 a.m. Hawaii time. That is 1 p.m. Pacific, and 4 p.m. Eastern. And all those other time zones in between, that's your responsibility to figure it out, because I can't do that much more math. We are supposed to be relaxing in this time of struggle. Anyways, we appreciate you for viewing. You'll have 24 hours to watch this link or the video in our Instagram stories, and then we are going to be uploading them to a YouTube page so that you can share it with your friends or re-listen to each chapter and be entertained. Okay, hope you're having a good one. See ya. Oh, how do I turn this off? Oh, there it is.